Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. And thank you to Headway for giving me this opportunity to speak about a really important aspect of brain injury rehab and something that, in my opinion, is greatly overlooked as part of a survivor's journey following their injury. Next slide, please, Sam. So the plan for today is I want to have a bit of a think about the importance of work for everyone, including those with a brain injury, the effects of injury on work and vocation, the importance of pre-vocational skills and roles, how we talk to colleagues about our brain injury and things we might want to consider discussing, workplace adjustments, and what support there might be available for you. So I think it's really important to remember that each individual brain injury survivor is unique and their circumstances are unique. And as much as I'd like to be able to give detailed, personalised information, this talk is about an overview of an approach that may help some and provide some guidance. Unfortunately, it can't be person specific. Next slide, please. So a little bit about me. So as Tamsin kindly said before, I did graduate in 2000 and started working in 2001. I'm originally from Australia. I spent some time working in the stroke units and outpatient neuro rehab at St George's Hospital. In 2005, I came to the UK and worked in a variety of inpatient community teams, neurobehavioural units, and some long-term neuro condition teams in the community. So I started working independently in 2013. And early on, I had a fantastic opportunity to be involved in a research group that looked at mild to moderate brain injury survivors soon after their hospital discharged and looked at early intervention to getting people back into work soon after their injury. So we provided education, provided support to workplaces, liaised with workplaces about people coming back into work after brain injury. So I had the pleasure of working with Dr. Julie Phillips, Ruth Tyman, and Jane Holmes, who are some of the leading UK experts in neurovoc rehab. This was a fantastic experience for me and provided me with a lot of knowledge and support in this new area of work. Next slide, please. So when we think about what work is an activity that involves mental or physical effort in order to achieve a goal or a result. And today, I really want to try to concentrate on paid work or the unpaid equivalent, such as volunteering, but work such as parenting, housework, home maintenance is equally as important, and often, almost all the time, it's not paid, but helps support our ability to engage in the paid work and paid vocational roles. Next slide, please. So work in itself holds a lot of value. Work has an important role to play in supporting positive mental health. It provides both intrinsic and extrinsic rewards for the person or the worker. It is a natural place for us to socialise. We share common interests, work with people at a similar age, but also is a fantastic learning opportunity to develop professional and personal skills and the soft skills that we require throughout our working career and life. Work can also help support longer life and reduce mortality in some populations. Next slide, please. So when we think about returning to work, or what does work do for people with chronic conditions such as an acquired brain injury, I view work as an ability to help drive therapy and drive rehab and the goals for the individual. It should form part of a rehab plan and not be separate to it. And the MDT should be working towards this goal for the client. Often it can improve health outcomes for many of our brain injury survivors on a physical, cognitive, psychological, and social level. And it provides a really important role within society and opportunities for individuals to participate. Unfortunately, too often we see brain injury survivors lose friends, colleagues, and sometimes family due to the effects of brain injury and the impact this has on their relationship. And hopefully engagement in work can really provide an avenue for participation and improvement in real key quality markers like quality of life and well-being. And also as well, one of the things that can often happen is resulting from brain injury is the loss of income and the risk of increased risk of poverty and loss of earnings. So hopefully re-engaging in work can reduce this risk. Next slide, please. But we all know that work can also be a stress for many, and especially if our coping strategies are impacted by brain injury, or there is a risk that certain workplaces can be detrimental to people. There's a term that's used a lot more commonly these days about toxic workplaces and the stresses that this places on people. And also as well, certain work roles can have greater health and safety risks for individuals. And this requires really careful management and assessing whether an individual can adhere to risk management plans and guidelines. And some people in the brain injury population may struggle with these without really close support or supervision. Next slide, please. So when I start the discussion with a client about what their goals are and whether they want to return to some form of work and whether this is a real priority for them, there are a number of questions that I keep in mind and I want to explore at that time. So firstly is that, what is the type of work did you do? What type of work did you do before your injury? What was your role? What type of environment did it occur in? What were the demands that were placed on you? Do you have a role to go back to? Is there something that you can return to and we can focus on? Sometimes recovery and rehabilitation following a brain injury can take quite a long time, and certain work circumstances can change. So, and then thinking about how the injury has affected you. Are you ready for work? And we'll talk a little bit about work readiness in a bit. What does work understand about brain injury? How may your colleagues respond? And the length of time that an individual is out of work can impact on their ability to return to work. So we know that the longer a person is out of work, the harder it is to return back to those roles. Next slide, please. So some roles are actually quite well suited to being adjusted or graded to help a person to return to work, and others less so. So there might be an opportunity within an organisation for redeployment to a different role that suits your needs better or provides value, and also provides value to the employer. So for example, a police officer might be injured at work or injured outside of work, may not be able to return to frontline policing duties because of their impairments and difficulties, but an admin or a non-public facing role may be more suitable for them and still provide valuable input. And also we need to take into consideration how the injury may impact on the safety within the role and the risk management between different types of occupation. So a roofer with a vestibular dysfunction following their brain injury has a very different risk weighting than an individual such as a receptionist who might have a similar type of problem. So we always need to take into consideration the well-being and safety of our client, the person returning to work, and this needs to be carefully assessed and weighed up. Next slide, please. So one thing that I do know is that every single brain injury survivor is unique. And a colleague once said to me, if you've met one person with a brain injury, then you've met one person with a brain injury. So each individual has their own specific needs and needs to be supported in an individual way based on their difficulties, the role they might be going back into, the environment and the culture of that workplace. So we need to understand what the difficulties are for that person following their brain injury, either their physical and sensory impairments, their cognitive perceptual difficulties, psychological and emotional adjustments and challenges they may face in the workplace, and also dealing with some of the challenges within the workplace, and also aspects such as communication and fatigue, because fatigue can contribute quite significantly to an escalation of impairments due to the nature of it. There's also issues such as sleep disturbances and hormone imbalances that are common after brain injury that can also impact on an individual in the workplace. Next slide, please. The thing I keep in mind is that going back to work is I view as a marathon, not a sprint. It's a fairly common message I get from clients. They'll be able to get back to work within a couple of weeks and they'll be back full time and all back to normal. Unfortunately, this is rarely the case. Going back to work is much more of a long game. It's more of a marathon. It's going to take time. You're also going to need to do the training before you go back into work. Which brings us to next slide, please, which is our readiness for work. So the questions that about how ready are you to return to work? So are you, at the moment, what's your routine like? Are you going to bed at 3 a.m. and waking up at midday? Whilst work can help establishing routines, we feel it's always good to have that routine established prior to commencing or wanting to go back into work. One of the things we don't want is difficulty at the first hurdle or falling at the first hurdle when you're unable to get up and get to work or develop that routine that allows you to do that. What about getting out and about in the community? Work often requires traveling into. So can you get yourself to work or do you need some support with that? Sleep, nutrition, hydration, exercise are all protective factors that will assist you in the workplace. So having these dialed in, exploring what your exercise routine is like, trying to get all these things that support your ability to go back into work is a really important aspect. And what about going into challenging and more difficult environments, especially for people that might have more sensory processing difficulties after brain injury, be more sensitive to noise, to light, to distractions? Can you handle these type of situations and these environments? And your communication within those places can also needs to be taken into account and considered. Next slide, please. So supporting work to improve their understanding of brain injury and the challenges that may be in place is really important. So how much does your work know about brain injury? Do they have any experience with working with people that may have had stroke or some form of acquired brain injury? Some places can be more compassionate and understanding and more flexible and supportive, where others not so much. There is a real need for education and support within the workplace for the employer, the employee, and colleagues that might be assisting an individual to return to work. And this is where I think the disclosure around brain injury is a really important consideration for individuals to think about and decide. So disclosure, when talking about brain injury, is the sharing of information about your injury, the impairments or difficulties you may have following that, and how this is going to affect work potentially. So you don't have to share this information, but it can be helpful if things don't quite go to plan at work. The sharing of information, you also be able to share your strategies and support. And this also opens the door for reasonable adjustments and protective characteristics under the Equalities Act of 2010. So if things aren't going well and you disclose the information about your injury, work is more likely, from my experience, to take this into consideration and be much more supportive and flexible around your needs. One of the things I always try to encourage clients to do is to have prepared information sheets that is in easy to access form about your difficulties, about any adjustments that need to happen, and what support is helpful at work. And this allows you to not have to repeat yourself and answer the same questions over and over again. And also you provide this information in writing to your colleagues and managers. So there's no real discussion about this hasn't been disclosed or hasn't been shared with us. And as a result, reasonable adjustments can be made to your needs. And I've found that workplaces can be surprisingly flexible if you share your story, your journey, and what your support needs are. Next slide, please. So disclosure I feel is very much about the client or the person returning to work about taking control, acknowledging that there are challenges, but you're saying, yes, there are difficulties, but this is what I can do about them with your support. And this is what I can do to manage and succeed with these adjustments and with your support in the workplace. Next slide, please. So reasonable adjustments. So reasonable adjustments for workers with disabilities or health conditions. So employers must make reasonable adjustments to make sure that workers with any sort of disability or physical or mental health conditions are not substantially disadvantaged when doing their job. So this applies to all workers. Next slide, please, Sam. So this applies to all workers, including trainees, apprentices, contract workers, and business partners. And there is a link about reasonable adjustments that you can access in the slides. And what these might be, what reasonable adjustments might be includes, next slide, please, Sam. These might be changes to the recruitment process. So a candidate may be better to interview in person versus online if they have some communication or information processing difficulties. Work may provide you with voice recognition software like Dragon, for example, because typing might be a bit more difficult after a brain injury. You might require a set desk, so not hot desking, which allows for you to be in an area that supports your attentional needs and reduces distractions when you're working. It might be a phased return to work over a 4 or 5 month period, flexible working hours to allow you to miss out on rush hour and getting to and from work. It might be working patterns from home, so being able to do a couple of days at home per week rather than traveling into the office each day or traveling into different sites. It's also about offering employees different training opportunities, recreation facilities that maybe help support your fatigue at that time. Next slide, please. So preparing for a return to work, I think there are some really key things that individuals can do and we really promote to do to try to maximize that return. So one of the very big things is, from my perspective, is trying to get fitter and get stronger and get moving from a physical perspective. If you can get more physically active, build physical resilience, hopefully this will help contribute to fatigue management, which is one of the more, fatigue's one of the more common problems that people describe following a brain injury. Sleep hygiene, controlling what you can. There is some great information out there that's accessible and free online about trying to maximize or improve your sleep routine and sleep hygiene. There's a link within the slides to be able to access some of that information. So I'm really mindful as well as that there can be changes to the neuroanatomy following a brain injury, and this can cause disruption with hormones and neurotransmitters that can occur, and that can really impact on your sleep. Sometimes it may be beneficial for individuals to seek medical advice about potential medication such as melatonin or something similar that helps people get off to sleep and improves their sleep routine overall. Trying to work on the morning routine, thinking about times in which you need to get up and working towards a goal time to get up, get ready, potentially get out the door as if you're returning back to work. The role of nutrition and hydration is really, really important to help sustain energy levels, cognitive functioning, and also there's a growing body of evidence of the role of our gut in our mental health and the links with neurotransmitters and hormones. And this is a really important area for people after brain injuries to make sure that the energy and nutrition they're taking in is optimized. and also fatigue management. So I know the Headway have had a recent webinar on fatigue management, and some of this information is really good to be able to apply in the workplace settings. So once we've decided that going back to work is a real option, a real goal for you, and we've done all the preparatory work, we've tried to become a bit more active. We're working on our sleep, our hydration, our nutrition. We're going to be starting the discussions with work. Next slide, please. So it's really trying to dial down into what, and looking in depth as to what your work role is, what duties you did, how long it took, the demands on the person, the physical, the cognitive, the interpersonal, the emotional aspects of it, and getting permission from you, and this can only come with permission from the service user or the client, is talking to the employer about their expectation and knowledge. What are they expecting from the person coming back into work? How open is the workplace to receiving input and guidance from a clinical team? Are they open to improving their understanding about brain injury, and what they think the employee's role was going to be going back? Because there might be a misalignment between the client or the employee returning to work and the employer. So there's a lot of discussion, education happens at this point. Next slide, please. So once we started that process, we can look at some of those pre-vocational skills that support an individual specifically around work. So thinking about or practicing travel routes to and from work. How will you get there? How do you manage peak hour, rush hour crowds? How tired are you getting at their end? What are your tolerance for those environments? When you're back in the workplace, all workplaces are different. So there's different types of environments, level of noise, levels of visual processing and challenges. And how are you going to cope in those situations? Can we replicate work-like tasks before you go into the work environment? So are there things that you can do that would be very similar to or challenge you in the same ways that work might do? And these are all parts of process, what we would call as work hardening. So we would be replicating your typical days at work and seeing how you would be coping and managing. Are there areas that we need to improve on? And then also there's the element of managing the emotional challenges of going back into work. So going back into work can be stressful, it can be anxiety provoking, and also dealing with people asking similar questions about how things are going, how your rehab is, and the setbacks that may occur during that time. These can be quite potentially difficult situations to manage. Next slide, please. So once we're back at work, there's quite a few things that can help support you within that work role and the crucial first stages at work. So workplace observations can provide a useful insight into a person's abilities at work, but also how others may be interacting with them, how others may be supporting and actioning the adjustments and the recommendations from the clinical team. And it is not just about observing the client, but how others are working with that person to help them in their work role. We can look at specific tasks and activities and break them down. We look at challenges as why certain tasks might be more difficult, where a person may need more assistance, different ways to approach a task, how to make things more effective for you, and also to help support some reflection on performance and seeing if there's areas that you might identify it can be improved. What's really key in work is being able to get feedback from people that you trust, whether it's line managers or colleagues. And this can be really, really helpful in improving your workplace abilities, helpful in improving your workplace performance. And maybe it could be something about interactions with other staff, your communication. Sometimes this feedback can be difficult to hear, but the aim of it is to be constructive. And the aim is to be beneficial for you to be able to adopt things and then change. It's always great to hear positive feedback, and this I think can be really motivating for individuals and allowing to see the progress that they're making. So being able to use strategies in the workplace is really key. So this will help sustain a person who might have difficulties at work. And these strategies might be pacing and fatigue management strategies, so having regular breaks, taking yourself off, using ways to support some difficulties, strategies to support executive functioning difficulties, attentional strategies. So obviously, depending on what your individual needs are. Always want to ensure that there is concise and clear documentation about what adjustments work are going to do for you, and ensuring that they're keeping up their end of the bargain as well you keeping up yours. So it's very much a two-way street with supporting people at work. And then there's an ongoing conversation and ongoing support to work, to colleagues, to the employer about brain injury, about the individual specific needs and how the best to support them, because it's a bit of an evolution as people go through their work placements and returning to work. Next slide, please. So you can very much see returning to work, from my perspective, is very much an MDT approach, with the client at the absolute center of it and everyone working towards their goals. So areas such as communication, emotional regulation, workplace relationships are really key in maintaining the work roles. And all of us as a team have a role to play in this. And also support in the workplace can be really vital and make a massive difference in maintaining an individual in the work role versus losing one. Next slide, please. So what if there's no job to return to? And unfortunately, not being able to return to work or return to a previous work role is all too common for some brain injury survivors. But work still holds a real value and is important on a number of levels, and can make a major contribution to quality of life and self-worth. So at this point, it's really important to consider. So if you can't go back to work, I think it's important to consider what you value, what your skills are, how you want to use your time, and have a bit of a reset and rethink and recalibration. So I always feel that volunteering can be a great stepping stone to returning to some form of paid employment. And used in coordination with some active job searching and preparation, this can be really invaluable. So I think it's also really important to try to manage our expectations at this point. And again, it's thinking about the long game with this. And for someone that may not be able to return to a previous work role, work may look quite different for them. And we have to consider maybe part-time roles, working in a different industry, reskilling, different type of work, or as I said before, maybe even just unpaid voluntary work for a longer period of time. So I think these are all some of the benefits, I think, of having undertaken volunteering work. So it allows us to re-establish routine and structure. It can provide the individual with work hardening, increased tolerance to different environments, to physical activity, which is all really, really positive. Just because you're doing volunteer work or unpaid work, it doesn't mean you can't be doing job searching. Allows you time to do interview practice, things like videoing and reviewing with a speech and language therapist or a colleague or a friend or family member to get feedback on how you're presenting and how your communication is. When you're working with other colleagues, gathering feedback from them about how you're performing, what you're like, and things that are important to you can be really helpful if you're wanting to take the next step into paid work. It allows us the opportunities to test skills and test strategies in real world environments, pacing strategies, fatigue management, those type of things that will pay benefits in other types of roles. And then when you get to the chance to do, the opportunity to do interviews for paid jobs, having interviews and getting feedback on that is I think essential. So then you can then take that feedback and make changes to the next interview that you do or the next step in the process. Next slide, please. So one of the questions I often get asked, and can be sometimes a bit of a barrier for people to think about volunteering, is that will volunteering work impact on my benefits? And often benefits are quite key in being able to sustain people if they're not in work. And the short answer is probably not, but it depends on your situation. And there are some fantastic organisations that can give you impartial advice on the effects that volunteering may have on your benefits. One of them is Citizens Advice Bureau, which are great to be able to seek that information from. And there's another website, NCVO, which the links are in the slideshow today. Next slide, please. So some places where you might be able to look for work. Some options. Even Break is a website that has jobs that are for more disability confident employers, which is a scheme, which is a government-backed scheme where employers are much more open or much more willing to take a wide range of employees from different backgrounds, especially for those with disabilities. Your job centre should have access to a disability employment advisor or a job coach, although these are much more rare and few and far between these days, but they are out there. And sometimes I think taking a much more personalised approach can be quite good. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I've done with some clients is taking a really positive and assertive approach of approaching businesses directly. It can be quite challenging, but it demonstrates a willingness to be able to test oneself, put themselves out there, and showing potential employers that you're motivated and engaged. So it's and this does involve some work before polishing up your CV. Ideally, if you've got some recent volunteering or volunteering work, then this is a great thing to be putting into your CV. But it can be quite challenging to do, and sometimes it needs to be supported. And please, there are some knockbacks, so it can be quite a challenging thing to undertake. Next slide, please. Oops. Next slide, please, Sam. And so this is some, so within the slide, there's some information about organisations from the NHS, also independent organisations that can support people through vocational rehabilitation and can use that people can use to return to work. Some of these services are very regional and level ones, but hopefully your local NHS service will have access to a vocational rehab team. But again, it's very regional dependent. There are some non-NHS organisations such as Attend and Papworth, and also some fabulous charities that support people with returning to work, volunteer opportunities, Headway being one of them, Silver Linings, and ABIL. Next slide, please. And so next slide, please, Sam. So access to work. So access to work, I'm not sure if So this is an organisation, it's a publicly funded employment support program. It's run by the government, and allows people wanting to return to work to access funds and access assessments in order to keep them in work. And it's set up for people with disabilities. So there's two elements or two aspects that they can do, which one is assessment and one is elements. So assessment is about exploring workplace barriers to employment and making recommendations and how these can be overcome. Sometimes not all assessments will result in the provision of one or more element, and the elements are, next slide please, Sam. So these are in addition to the reasonable adjustments that a workplace should be making for you if you've declared disability and brain injury. And these can be things such as communication support for interviews, special aids and equipment, any adaptations to premises, to vehicles that you might use through work, traveling to work. So I've had people funded for taxis to get to and from work because of their fatigue or because of their memory difficulties. Traveling within work itself, access to a support worker whilst they're in work, or support services as well. So they have, in 21-22, there was about £150 million of funding for people going into work via the access to work, with the majority of that with things like support worker roles. Next slide, please, Sam. So that's just some information on the breakdown of that. Next slide, please. So just some things to keep in mind with access to work is that the assessors may not be neurospecialists. They may not have a great understanding of brain injury specific challenges, and they may not have a depth of understanding about your specific needs as a survivor. But if it allows funding and equipment and support for you to maintain a work role, it's definitely worth exploring. There is applications can be made by the employer or the employee, and this can be done online, but sometimes the process itself can be quite challenging, especially when they're asking for detailed work information as well. So you may need support with some of that, some of the paperwork and admin side. So I just quickly want to touch on a couple of clients that I've worked with and their vocational rehab journey. Next slide, please, Sam. So this is CB, and he's a 20-year-old male, and he had his brain injury at 18 following a road traffic collision. So he was completing a college course in bodywork and paint, and he was due to start an apprenticeship at the time of the injury. He had quite a few difficulties after his brain injury, including memory, attention, executive dysfunction, fatigue, and social communication issues. So he was supported to go through his level 3 at college in paint and bodywork. He had high levels of support in college because that was a real challenge for him. He had dyslexia before his injury as well. He was really motivated to work, and his motivation was to earn money, which is great. That's not a problem. He's motivated. But there was a real misalignment of where CB thought he should be at in regards to pay versus the reality. Next slide, please. So what we took on that really personalised approach with CB, we brushed up his CV. We mapped out an area close to his home, or commutable area close to his home. We found some potential businesses. We approached them directly, okay? And we discussed his story. We discussed his journey, what he'd done so far, took a really proactive approach. We declared his injury really, really early. I did lots of workplace education about brain injury. We had lots of dialogue about what adjustments would be. We negotiated a 4-day working week with reduced hours for him whilst he was there, had flexibility to attend medical meetings and rehab appointments, and we shortened his hours initially to manage the fatigue. Next slide, please. And we had regular feedback sessions with work. We set goals, we gathered observations, and we supported CB to in work and work itself with his brain injury. We came close to him losing his job because of how he presented at work. So I had to do a lot of damage limitation with him. We had a meeting with CB and his management. It was a real wake-up call for him. So on the non-work day, we did some intensive work to raise his insight, recognize his difficulties, and him to make changes. And now he's flourishing. So he's doing 4 long days at work, which is coping really well. He's in the paint booth all the time, which is really empowering and motivating for him. And he's loving work. Next slide, please. So this, on the other side of the story, is BP. And he's a 38-year-old male who had a severe brain injury in late 2015 when he was 29. So prior to his injury, he was at master's level education. He was multilingual, still is multilingual. He worked in finance and market analysts. He had really significant cognitive difficulties following his ABI, and we knew that a return to work, to his previous work role, was just not realistic. But his insight into this was really limited, and he really wanted to go back into work. So we had to undertake what we call a supportive failure to be able for B to be able to move on with his rehab and consider other things in his life. So we had a meeting with work, who got an understanding, really got an understanding of what his roles would be. We picked out some tasks that could be tested, so replicating work roles. Next slide, please. So we set these tasks for B, which he wasn't able to complete, and we used this failure to raise his insight and to help the discussion about what's realistic after his injury. So it was really important to get an understanding of what was important for B now, or his work roles, his pre-injury values, and what his post-injury goals were. So I researched options, looked at potential opportunities nearby, and we discussed with them and disclosed information about his injury. We did lots of education and support before him going in there into these work roles. And now, so B works 3 short days a week in 2 different venues. One's in a cafe and one's at Park Run, because he used to be a runner before his injury. And he's a really valued member of the team there. Absolutely, he's a bit of a local celebrity when he goes down. He gets a lot of out of work. He views it not as volunteering, but as work. It's really valuable for him, and it provides really important structure to his week, and also the opportunity to flourish. And I don't think that he would have progressed as far in his rehab if we hadn't had these work roles in place for him. And I think I've come to the end of my talk now. Next slide, please, Sam. So this is me. These are sort of the areas that myself and my associates cover. Happy to answer any questions that you have about returning to work or vocational rehab and brain injury. And thank you for allowing me the chance.